I'm also going to go find and seek the stress, the drama that matches my internal anxiety. And I get this moment of relief that the world is actually aligned and true. Asking someone to fight that by going to and doing gratitude work is really hard for them, because what you're saying to them unintentionally is change everything about you that you cannot change.
Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have Dr. Scott Lyons on the show. He is a holistic psychologist, a trauma expert, an author, and many more things. And Scott, I want to jump in early in your journey because I know you grew up as you called, a walking ghost with a lot of abuse and addiction in your household. What were some of the pivotal moments in your early childhood that brought you down this path?
Yeah. And when we say this path, I just want to say, I'm a doctor and I'm a psychologist
So
and
much.
I'm writing books about health and wellness. And, I think for many of us who had experiences of early trauma and end up in a field where we are wanting to help others. And interestingly enough, sometimes that leads into and perpetuates our own addiction to stress.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the fields of helping others are quite full of turmoil and trauma and drama that may not be so unsimilar to the environment which we grew up in. And for me, that was very much the case where, in my family, the currency of love was chaos. You were most seen and recognized when something was wrong. And so that really became the currency of love of if something is wrong means you get your needs met, then I'm going to internalize that and absorb it like a sponge, that something wrong is good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to look for it. I'm going to seek it out. I'm going to maybe even create it in my own life unintentionally to keep getting those primary needs met. Some early pivotal moments for me is literally when I was born, my mom ruptured her vertebrae, her spine. And so I, for some time, didn't have that primary caregiver in my life. And it was, not that I can remember it firsthand, but it sets the tone for literally what's to come next is the moments before, these early pivotal moments. And when you mention a walking ghost, I write about that in the book, Addicted to Drama, very early on, because I remember as a child saying to my parents, I don't feel whole. I don't feel dimensional. And I knew that because I'd have little moments, little flickers of moments where I felt like I could feel my whole chest and back at the same time, where I could feel like I wasn't flat. And I just walked through a lot of my early life as something like flat. And we could take that into an emotional perspective and say depressed.
Yeah.
But I felt it physically in my body as there's no space. There's something feels unfilled. Something feels absent. And we have the psychological language of saying disassociated or dissociation. And so that was me as a walking ghost, just totally dissociated in the world. Just a big empty void of where I should have belonged and my body carrying around that void, basically.
Yeah. I know there was a big moment when you were 13 that really, what you call is weaponized empathy. You have so many phrases in your book that I absolutely love and give context or tangibility to feelings and emotions that we feel throughout our lives. And it's really important. Do you mind breaking down what that looks like? Because I feel our addiction to trauma, we may not even be aware of it, but it serves us, and we wouldn't do it otherwise.
Yeah. Our addiction to stress, drama, whatever word is easier for you to metabolize, is absolutely, it has value. It has biological, evolutionary value. Else we wouldn't do it. Right. Like any addiction is helping fill that empty void I was just referring to. And so an addiction to drama, in addition to filling a void, as you said, has the value of distracting us from underlying pain. Like when the world is in chaos, are you really attending to yourself? No, you're attending to the outside stimulus. So it helps distract you from your own trauma, essentially, your own inner pain that's stored in your body. It is also simultaneously a pain reliever. It literally blocks. So when we're in a stress state, it blocks the pain receptors. And so the more stress we have, the less we will feel pain if we have to engage in certain activities, like a fight response. If you get into a fight, you don't want to feel a lot. You want to feel more numb. And the other thing about stress is because of that pervasive pain or trauma that many of us carry around, it turns into numbness. It turns into depressive numbness. Like we all know that to some level. Like we have a bad day, or like something sad happens in our life, someone passes away, we feel numb for a while. Now, for those of us who are addicted to drama, that numbness is pervasive. It exists in our bodies constantly. And stress helps rise gives us the ability to feel something above that threshold of numbness. It gives us a sense of aliveness and energy. You know, when I was a walking ghost as a kid, in addition to not feeling much, I also didn't feel energized. Like we thought I was just like had some autoimmune disorder or something as a kid, when really I didn't feel much and I felt lethargic. And the things that gave me a sense of power and energy was like getting up on a stage in front of 1,000 people, or getting into a fight with my sister and outsmarting my parents as to why I was right for the fight. You know, those type of things give you a sense of distraction, pain relief, power, energy. So why wouldn't we become addicted to it? Why wouldn't we become dependent on things that help us essentially get out of the muck, out of being a walking ghost in our own minds? And I forgot your previous question.
No, it's just like, I love the breakdown of it, and honestly, we could go down so many rabbit holes throughout this entire podcast, because I find that's when the best stuff comes, is going down rabbit holes. But it's so valuable understanding
Sure.
that, and to even dive deeper into that. I've heard you say a couple times that when you're stressed out, it increases like an endorphin high of some sort, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing when you go running, right? Like you get an endorphic high.
Right.
What you're doing during a run is literally stressing your body.
Yeah.
When you go into an ice tub, we think about it as like positive stress. It's all just stress, you know, whether it's hermetic or whatever type of fancy word we want to put on it.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally stressing the current state we are in and asking for change, because stress is an adaptive response. So in any type of change thing that's requiring you to change or demanding change, you release endorphins to become less sensitive, essentially, so that you can action more.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Like most of this makes sense when we put it into perspective, but many of us are living in
why would we know it?
Right. But it's like so many people are living in a low ambient anxiety, or a low state of stress, or just a constant state of like just seeking drama in their lives. And it's like we can be aware of it. Obviously, that's the first step. But after we've gained that awareness, what is that next step?
Yeah. Oh, I just remembered you asked me about weaponized empathy.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll go back
for
a moment.
Yeah.
Because I love a good weaponized empathy.
I'm with you.
So I think you were referring to when I was 13, I faked my own suicide attempt.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I also didn't have other actual suicide attempts at that age, but this particular event that really stood out to me as a dramatic act was because I was getting bullied at school. I bullied by teachers and students. I had a severe learning disability, and the teachers thought I was messing with them. Because I could get answers, but I couldn't figure out how to get to the answers. It was so messy and so chaotic that they thought I was messing with them. And so they would call me stupid. They would tell me I'm not being a good student, essentially. And I was getting punched into lockers. Just, like a really bad 80s movie, like all of that shit. And my parents didn't believe me. I couldn't find an authority figure to believe me. And I got to a point where I thought, if I could get people to feel the pain I was feeling, then they would finally believe me. So an eye for an eye. They had to, in my belief system, be in as much pain as I am in to be able to empathize and help make change. So the thing that I thought about, or the thing I did, was to make them feel as much guilt and hurt that I would go to as far as to kill myself. And I have some shame around it still, but I also recognize and have a lot of empathy for that younger 13-year-old who didn't have other skills of how do I get free from this pain, and truly believing, and maybe some of it's true, that that people had to feel as shitty as I did in order to start to take me seriously. And that really helped me understand weaponized empathy and how it showed up later in, like, when I was doing couples therapy, and I would watch like one of the couple just keep attacking and going like way past a point of okayness, of bringing up the past. And one instance in particular, I remember saying to one of the people in the couple, I was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "You have, instead of getting your point across, you've gone past the point of recognition, and now your partner's shut down. Is that what you want?" And she said, "No, I want him to feel what I felt." And I said, "Well, you pushed him past that level. You didn't ever pause to check in how he's feeling. You kept pushing past." And that's what happens in weaponized empathy, is we don't actually have the capacity to register, to pause and register the effect and impact we're having when we want someone to feel as bad or as shitty as we feel. And we often do it. It's called revenge. And we have these microaggressive versions of revenge that we all do. That, oftentimes to a partner, that if I punish you by bringing up the past, or I punish you by things you did in other relationships, then you will feel the kind of like ache I feel from your behavior. And so that's weaponized empathy. Those with addiction to drama use it extensively, because they do not have the ability to be vulnerable enough to take someone's empathy in, to take in an apology, to take in anything, because lowering the drawbridge, so to speak, of the relational castle, to let you into my life and for me to meet yours, feels absolutely dangerous. It feels so dangerous to be in true intimacy and vulnerability, that the only way I can truly believe that you're aligned with me is if you're in my chaos, if we're in the same shitstorm together, if we're in the same pain. So sometimes someone who's addicted to drama will actually create like a tornado. It's like a whirlwind of chaos, and they'll pull you into it, and you'll be in that chaos with them, and suddenly they feel a sense of belonging. Because in all other aspects of their life, they feel out of sync, and they do not feel any sense of belonging, which is interesting, because the antidote for most addictions is not sobriety, it's belonging.
I'm going to be speechless throughout this podcast, because so much of this is so important. I once heard, and I don't remember who said it, but it was that we have ancient brains trying to deal with modern day problems. And that's such a great example of that, because logically it makes sense that someone would do that, but it also makes sense that the reason for it. But then when we take a step back and we gain a different perspective from it, we recognize that it's so much of it is a story that we're telling ourselves about the experience that creates it. I know you said once that 80% of what's happening is the story that we tell ourselves, compared to 20% is the actual sensory experience, which is so powerful. And this is why, like, so much of my podcast has helped people recognize, like, take a step back and recognize most of your life is a story, whether it's the story you tell yourself or the story you tell yourself about the way life is supposed to be. And I think it's so powerful. I want to reverse back a little bit, going back to the awareness of it, because through this podcast, people are going to gain the awareness. Once they've gained the awareness of this happening in their lives, what is the next step?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when awareness is a lovely first step, but awareness doesn't equate to change. I want to be really clear about that, because often we think, oh, I'm aware of this pattern I've done, and thus life is grand and talk therapy has worked. But that, my friends, is bullshit. Awareness is a bridge into change, but it is not change itself. So the next stages are things that actually induce change. So if I notice I am sourcing all of these different ways to rev myself up, to feel that stress response, like I keep looking for problems. Even when I'm calm and still, I keep thinking about all the things my boss did that day. Like I don't leave work at work. All of these different strategies that I call revving. So I'm sourcing stress, whether internally or externally, to keep myself in an activated state, an agitated state, you might call it. And so starting to notice where we do that. Okay, so I notice when I'm feeling a little hungry, which I think a lot of us can relate to.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden we get into fights. Okay, so there's an awareness, there's a linkage between those two. So I'm noticing the next time I'm hungry, the impulse to start to look for what's wrong in the room. Okay, so instead of that, I'm going to call myself on it. I'm like, oh, I'm revving again. I'm looking for something that's wrong in the space. And instead, I'm going to go and look what's under the hood of my own emotional needs, which is I'm feeling hungry and I'm feeling a little, I don't know, sad from something I don't even need to know what it's from.
Right.
Okay. And instead of sourcing negative material to amp myself up into a stress response, I'm going to actually just attend to myself.
This podcast is kindly brought to you by Magic Mind. Now, if you're anything like me, you love coffee, but you hate the jitters that it gives you in that 2 p.m. slump in the afternoon when you still have a lot of day left, but you're not able to be focused throughout that time. And this is why I love Magic Mind. I've been taking it with my morning coffee. It's a small productivity shot that I absolutely love. It's with matcha, which takes longer to release in your body. So instead of feeling slumped at 2 p.m., you actually have that intentional focus and it reduces stress. So I take it with my morning coffee. It helps me drink less coffee, but actually feel focused and not wired throughout the day, which is so impactful because if you're a podcaster or you're taking calls or you're just in general, you need to be focused and have that mental energy. It's been something that's really helpful for me. I've been using it for a few weeks and I guarantee that you will like it. So if you're anything like me and you want to feel focused but not wired, you can go to magicmind.com/youcan2 for 56% off. Yes, 56% off your first subscription. And for your first one-time payment, you can get 20% off, which is insane to say the least because they have a 100% money back guarantee with no questions asked. And instead of waiting 3 to 5 days for that money back, they'll refund you in 3 to 4 hours because they believe in it. And I believe in it so much. So that's magicmind.com/youcan2 for up to 56% off your first subscription. And if you already use Magic Mind, you can get a discount off your next subscription payment as well. So it's magicmind.com/youcan2. Try it for a few weeks, see if you like it. I bet you that you will, and you will feel a lot more intentional with your day instead of just so wired and really just exhausted by the end of the day. Back to the episode.
As the more we create the wedge in between stimulus and exaggerated response, yeah, as in most of what drama is an intensified, exaggerated response. So the more wedge we can go in between, like, oh, I had this feeling and it escalated into this massive response. I felt sad, so I burned a grocery store down. Okay, we might go, that's a little extreme, you know? And can we come back a few steps to when you were just sad? And the more gap we have in between stimulus and exaggerated response, the more opportunity we start to make for ourselves to take the elevator ride down into the more primal trauma and pain that has never been processed and metabolized, that is being stored in our body and has all these protective defensive mechanisms to prevent us from feeling flooded and overwhelmed by that pain.
Yeah.
So those are the first few stages.
Yeah, no, it goes so deep too, and that's the point I want to get to, because for people that have generational trauma, for example, that they don't know the root for where it came from. Maybe it came from a parent, maybe it came from someone that they grew up with, and it happened when they were getting programmed throughout the 0 to 6, right? How are you able to understand, and do you need to understand what that root is to change it?
No, not at all. What happens, so when we're about 3 years old, what's called the implicit memory and the explicit memory start to marinate together.
Mhm.
Implicit memory is more of like our sensations, it's also automatic patterns. Like riding a bike is implicit memory. We don't have to think about it. We just know it. And it's our primal memory system. It's what we call the memory of just the body memory.
Mhm.
And at 3 years old, we start to have more what's called narrative memories or declarative memories. So we start to remember a beginning, middle, and end of the situation. When we had trauma, whether it's generational trauma, shock trauma, developmental trauma, education trauma, whatever it is. Yeah, there's lots of different types. Relational trauma. What happens in that moment is a split. Trauma is fragmentation. So in this moment, what I'm talking about is the fragmentation between those two memory systems. So we will often store in our body the experience of the trauma and may or may not have any relation to the actual memory or the narrative of that trauma. And we don't need the narrative to come back into our body, give ourselves space, time, permission, support for it to be metabolized and processed through. Like if you've ever just had a really good fucking cry out of nowhere, like you're just like taking a yoga class or like like watching a movie on an airplane and you're just like, why am I crying? But it feels so good.
Yeah.
Like one of those moments, like those good ugly cries. That's just like your body releasing what's been stored, and you didn't have to know what it was to feel relief. And that's what we're referring to. So we don't have to know what's there to know something's there.
It's really important. And I wanted to discern that because I think for a lot of people, they feel they need to know the reason why to interrupt the pattern. And I've spoken to a lot of therapists in this space to understand that you really don't need to know where it came from because most of us aren't going to be able to memorize that. We just memorize the story that we've told ourselves about it.
Yeah.
I know for you, you worked with a therapist. I want to say it was in your early 20s or maybe early 30s, where you were doing a lot of yoga, you were doing meditation, all of that kind of stuff. And that was her, and she called you out on it, pretty much saying that that was your form of hiding. And I'd love to know, how are we able to discern the difference between hiding and using it as a way to help us?
Yeah, that's a great question. When a tool is us hiding or when we're using stress to hide from ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a longer process, I will acknowledge. And it helps to have a witness, someone who's trained as a therapist to identify like, that doesn't feel like it's truly coming from you. It feels like a story you're constructing, and it feels different. Like, do the practice with someone, like you and I might do it now. Like, do you know the game Two Truths and a Lie?
Yeah.
So it might even be a drinking game. I have no idea. But like, play Two Truths and a Lie with someone, and notice how you can recognize fallacy. Like, what in your body is able to go, that doesn't feel aligned with what they're saying. And how someone is in their truth. Like we are designed to be able to be lie detectors. Some of us who are therapists are just better trained over a long period of time to be like, yeah, that's bullshit. Like, that's not you. You keep coming back to this story, but we have other names for it. We call it intellectualization, disembodiment, disconnection. All of these things that are so far from feeling true. So we have this amazing system called mirror neurons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're sad and you walk into a room, those who have some attunement, and we all have attunement, but some of us are more attuned to our attunement, will be like, ooh, there's a sadness here. Yeah. And it's not magic. It's literally our biological evolution that's designed to attune to other people's feelings. And it's contagious. Feelings are contagious by simply being, when you have a feeling, I'm going to feel it to be able to make decisions. The most interesting example of that is what's called stress contagion. And that's because stress as a state, because it's one of the most important states for survival, is the most contagious. I get up on a stage, I'm speaking to 1,000 people, I'm nervous. My heart rate is fluttering, my eyes are blinking faster, I'm not very connected to the weight of my body. Guess who feels that? Everyone in the audience who's watching. Yeah. If you've ever seen someone awkwardly give a speech, you feel the pit in your stomach, right? So that's called stress contagion. You may not even know that you are actually in resonance, physiological resonance with the person who's in stress. And so this is a really important piece, because the more we have people addicted to drama, the more everyone else gets secondhand stress. And that's really important for the understanding of contagion too. Yeah, I'll pause there for a moment.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I think all of this is so important, because a lot of this at least from what I've been able to understand, a lot of people go through their lives without knowing any of what you just said. And being the awareness of that, and that's why I asked about what's the next step after awareness, because we have to be able to find a way forward. I think that these patterns that play out in our lives just keep us stuck for so long. And I know that there's a lot of symptoms to being addicted to drama. Are there any that come up for you?
Oh yeah, tons. Oh, you mean for me personally?
Yeah, I mean, throughout your journey, especially in your book too, you broke down a lot of
Yeah.
different, I guess you can say, patterns, or a lot of different areas where it's happened throughout just even decades of your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Gosh, we are so smart as humans with all of our little strategies and our
Yeah.
ways. We call them symptoms, but they're all just different strategies of getting that hit of stress. And so, symptoms are something we can observe, typically from the outside, and symptoms might be something we experience on the inside. And for someone who's addicted to drama, those are very two different things. The way we observe someone addicted to drama is going to be very different than the way they experience life. And there's going to be dissonance between the two. We're going to watch them and go, gosh, there's such a weird gap between how much response is needed to adapt and their response. Like they are blowing out a birthday candle with a fire hose. What the fuck? Like that. We're looking at the extreme dissonance between how much energy, attention, and emotion is required to action something and what they're doing. It's disproportionate. It's not energy efficient or emotion energy efficient. So that's a big symptom. They use particular language. So they use things like always, never. There's very extremes in the language, or what we call globalized, generalized language, where it's like something bad happened 5 minutes ago, but I go, ugh, my day is the worst. My week is the worst. I'm having the worst year. My life sucks. You can see how I'm getting a little bit more extreme each time. And as opposed to being able to be functional in my emotional intelligence and say oh, I had something happened 5 minutes ago and it just made me uncomfortable. Now I feel better. I just needed to say it. Thanks. So it's often a lack of communication about emotions and needs, their true emotions and needs. It's amplified on such an extreme level that actually isn't attainable or felt by them as they say it and express it. They believe that something will always be wrong. They'll say things like, it's always something. Like their capacity, even though they thrive off of stress, their capacity for it at the same time is pretty limited, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many examples like, oh, fuck, their relation. Am I allowed to say fuck on your show?
Absolutely.
You can bleep it. Okay.
You're good.
Fuck. Yeah, I'm glad I asked. So, their relationships are in constant extremes, extreme love and then extreme destruction. There's not in between. There's no ease and gray zones of relationship, which is the majority of what a relationship is. There's lots of jealousy and anger. They really rope people in. They might even be entertaining too, just to have a positive symptom too. They might gossip a lot. They often gossip a lot. They'll revent. They'll share the same story, often changing it, even for each audience member whom they're sharing it. I share it with you, and then I share it with my mom, and each time I'm changing the story slightly to amp it up or to make you more interested or pull you into my story. On the inside, the symptoms are again quite different. We feel like no one has our back. Yeah, we feel pervasively alone. We feel like the shoe's always going to drop. We feel like we need to be hyper vigilant for the next potential threat or trauma. Yeah, we see the world as scary. We see relationships as scary, that no one has our back and no one will really love us enough, when really we can't let them in to love us enough. And so like those are just some of the symptoms from the inside versus the outside.
I'm so grateful. That was something I wanted to speak about, was the difference between the outside experience and the internal experience that we have, because they're completely different.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is based on the story that
Totally.
we tell ourselves, right? When I was diving into a lot
Yeah.
of what you speak about, the first thing that came up for me was when I go and meet friends after the last a little while of speaking, the first thing that we talk
Mhm.
about is, oh, how are things? And they automatically have something to complain about, right? Like
Yeah.
that is the first thing that we speak about. Forget about the things that we can be grateful for. Forget about the ways that I've moved up, even if they're incremental. We automatically
Yeah.
go towards the worst thing. You
Yeah.
broke down
Yeah.
like the internal and external experience, but I'm curious, like, when does it become a problem? Because we're creating unnecessary turmoil, but yeah, when does it become a problem?
Yeah. So you're doing the opposite of a practice I call marinating in the good,
Hmm.
which is not to dismiss the fact that, oh, I might have pains and things I want to talk about or the negatives I want to talk about. But notice if you're using or starting with a negative as a means to draw people in. I don't just mean for attention. I mean like that currency of love again. Like if my belief is if I start with a negative, you'll actually attend to me more. And often people will. That's a problem in our culture. And if you say to me, I'm having a great day, I'll be like, oh, that's awesome. If you say to me, like, you're really struggling today, I'll be like, oh, buddy, what's going on? Tell me more. I'm here for you. Do you want me to listen? Do you want me to like give advice? What do you need? And all of a sudden, you might feel more seen and heard and recognized and honored and respected from reinforced by speaking with what is wrong as opposed to what is right.
Yeah, it's a really big difference.
And yeah, it's a really big difference. And so like I really appreciate that example that you bring in, because it's like, okay, so notice that. Like what happens when the next time you get together with your group of friends and you go, things have been lovely. Um like I did this podcast recording and I felt great about it. And I've been getting more emails of affirmations about like people's lives getting changed. And I feel like I'm really on the right track. And notice if those friends are able to attend to you, because that might mean something that these aren't the right friends. Are your friends enabling you and like just promoting your worldview? Or are
Mhm.
they supporting you and gently holding up a mirror and really like helping you recognize the shit that's holding you back in your life? And notice what type of friends you need to grow and what type of friends you have.
Yeah, again, it's such a big difference, and it's so important to take that perspective, because I've made gratitude
Mm.
such a massive habit for me, where that's the automatic first thing I go to, is all the things that I could say are pluses in my life
Mhm.
instead of looking at the minuses, because I feel like complaining is almost like a disease of some sort, and it happens very, very easily. It's our automatic response. You growing up, you've had I know in your 20s you had a lot of health issues, right? Like you were vegan for 23 years, 22 years, something like that, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
At 4 years old, which it first started, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And I know that like when you were eating, it took you a long time. It was kind of like your meditations. Never had red meat in your life. There's a lot of ways and areas that you hit of some sort. And I'm curious, like, what are some ways that we hide in our life without even knowing it? And of course, we've talked about meditation and yoga being those, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that question back. Yeah. So a good example I can give you, or hopefully a better example, is I went and did basically like this mindfulness meditation training my
Mhm.
freshman year of college. I did it in the summer. And it was a somatic training, so body oriented therapy and mindfulness. And I came and I had a great summer, and I felt like I really learned a lot. And I came back to university, and I was sitting in a class in university, and I was at that time I was in a BFA in acting and doing my psychology degree at the same time. So I was sitting in an acting class, and I was sitting really erect, like I was being a good meditator, and like, you know, putting on the pose of a meditator. And I had so many feelings about being back in school and whether I was in the right place, and I don't think this is my mission in life, and all of these things. And I was sitting with this rigidity, but I also thought that rigidity was the like the mindfulness, you know, like I was putting on the role, the label of mindful person. And I had a teacher come over, and she put her arm on my shoulder, I remember, and she said something like, "And what if you didn't have to hold?" And I just lost it.
Yeah.
I was crying. I was like, oh my God, I've been holding myself in this falseness for like weeks now, because I believe like I wanted people to think of me as a meditator. I wanted to think of myself as a meditator, as a mindfulness like expert. And like, and that meant what I really was doing in the rigidity of it was suppressing and repressing myself. And so there's ways we believe we can be doing stuff. They call that bypassing, specifically in a lot of traditions, spiritual bypassing. Like, oh, I'm doing these practices, and I'm studying this particular text, or I'm studying this particular spiritual approach, and so I'm amazing, and I'm more woke than anyone else, or awake than anyone else. And that's the bypassing. So when my therapist in my 20s, when I was literally losing my shit, like I was getting divorced, I had just had all these a massive health crisis. I had to quit a job. I lost my health insurance. I like all of these things, and I was just a mess, like rock bottom. And I said to this therapist, I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be here. Like, I should not be at rock bottom. I have all of these resources. I do yoga. I've done yoga for so long. I've done meditation. And her response was, what a beautiful place to hide. And I was like, what? And in that moment, it was the perfect thing to hear. I didn't like what I heard, but it was the perfect thing to hear, because all the holding that I had been doing, I don't know, it was something like peeled away in me, and like that last offense response that I was like, I'm a yoga practitioner, I should be above all of these emotion things. And it just dissolved, and I sunk into the depth of a lot of pain and ignored trauma that I had just not had access to before. Yeah.
It's so powerful. Your story's so powerful. You have so many layers to your story of the things that you've been through and the things that you've learned. You're such a you learn like nobody. I've not many people I've spoken to, like the things that you've done, and you're always on the go kind of thing, and that type A personality, something I definitely resonate with. But I love the breakdown of the different areas that you've been able to do that. I know that you talk about a dramatic narrative versus a suppressive narrative versus a reflective narrative. I'd love for you to break down the difference between those three, and then which one you think is the best for ourselves.
Yeah, so there's different forms of narrative, like how we tell a story. And it's really interesting, because we might just be like, what are we talking about? We just tell a story to a friend. But the way, the structure and the way we organize that story actually indicates quite a bit about how we function in the world. Do we function more in drama? Like when I go and I tell a story to you, and I go, and then he said, and then she said, and then they did this. That's called a dramatic narrative approach. Yeah, you like, I'm building up the story. I'm writing the play of it, you know? I'm writing the inner, like the part of the movie that's like full of drama and deserves a lot of attention in that way. So dramatic narrative. He said, then she said, and then this said. Notice what's not present is me. And then
Mhm.
it might be more like, and then they did this to me, but it's not reflective of like, and then I was sad. Like I was really sad. And then the sadness just so now we're getting into what's called reflective narrative. I
Mhm.
might go like a little bit of story. Hey, like when I was at the mall the other day and these kids just ignored me after I said hi, I just felt like nothing. I just felt like a ghost to them. And I felt like that invisibility makes me shrink and I feel worthless. And it reminds me of all those times when I was a kid, when I would beg my parents for money to go buy more books. And they said we didn't have any, but then they would come home with a new car or like new clothes, whatever it is. I'm making this
Of course.
up. That's a reflective narrative. Yeah, so the difference between a dramatic narrative and a reflective narrative, even then, and I want you to try this at home, like tell the same story from a dramatic narrative, tell the same story from a reflective narrative. So dramatic narrative is the actual, like, what I believe happened, what they said and what they said and what he did and what I did and blah, blah, blah. And reflective narrative is, and then I felt, which made me feel like, and it reminds me of. Yeah. And notice the difference in your stress level between the two. Notice the difference in your physiology. It is massive. And we don't often think about it. We just like do it. But the way we construct and organize our life stories actually have a deep impact because we hear ourselves saying it. And what we have to do physiologically to share it also has an impact on us and those around us. The last narrative, which is an interesting one, and I borrowed it from Joseph Campbell's work, which is the hero's journey narrative,
Mhm.
which is a little bit of integration of Joseph Campbell's work and what's known as post-traumatic growth. And in that, it's going, so this is a little bit of what happened. This is how I feel. And this is what I've learned. This is how I become the hero of my own life by what I'm learning and what I'm growing from.
Mhm.
And notice how that feels to share the same story from what you've learned and grown. And they each have a very different impact on you physiologically. And so what we mostly find, and there's reinforcement for it, is the dramatic narrative, that venting, that gossipy, that sort of approach to organizing our experience, which is just more dramatic.
I love it. The stories that we tell ourselves really direct the quality of our life, and it is so impactful. When I came across that ideology in itself, the direction of my life truly changed, and it's the thing that I'm most passionate about diving into. So I love the breakdown, and thank you for the breakdown. I
Yeah,
also find that receiving the good is something that I think a lot of people have a struggle with, for
oh
sure,
yeah.
and it's definitely a danger to those that are addicted to drama, trauma, whatever you want to call it. And
Mhm.
it's really, really important to, I think, change that relationship. So where do you think that or how do you think that we're able to change that relationship with stress, and also just being able to receive the good and talk about the gratitudes instead of automatically going to the dramas and
Right.
everything else?
Yeah, I think you're naming something. And like we might have this belief that like everyone should go do gratitude work. And
Mhm.
the reality is, as you're naming it, is like that feels dangerous for some folks.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it. So when we have trauma in our lives, often we think of trauma as like it's just something happens and we're impacted by it.
Hmm.
But that's just a little portion of what happens in trauma. What's important about trauma is also what happens next. Not the strategies we protect ourselves with from not feeling all the pain and the flooding, but
Hmm.
how do we protect ourselves by being more prepared? And that's what happens in trauma is we start to organize towards preparedness for the next potential threat or trauma. So our sense organs, that's our sight, our smell, our taste, our touch, our hearing, etc., all start to actually change to be more prepared for the next potential threat. We call that hypervigilance, right?
Mhm.
So my sight becomes more narrowed. I literally lose peripheral vision after trauma.
Crazy.
My taste buds become more attuned to bitters. My hearing becomes more attuned to low tone noises or potential, which are more associated with threat noises.
Yep.
My, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on.
Of course.
But
Of
each
course.
sense organ literally changes to be more attuned towards danger. And so if we think about it like we're a TV that's been tuned in now for danger, that's all we're going to see. That is the lens of the world that we need, that lens to protect us. And now that's the lens we see the world in. I see the world as potential danger. And not only do I see it because of my own anxiety that I feel like there's something always going to happen, I'm also going to go find and seek the stress, the drama that matches my internal anxiety. And I get this moment of relief that the world is actually aligned and true.
Mhm.
And so asking someone to fight that by going to and doing gratitude work is really hard for them, because what you're saying to them unintentionally is change everything about you that you cannot change. Change the way you see, change the way you smell, change the way you hear, change the way you taste, change the way you touch the world. And while you're changing, you might not be as prepared for the next possible threat or danger. And that's what's happening when we ask those who are addicted to drama, which is a lot of us,
Yeah.
to go do gratitude work. And it takes time to change the brain. It takes a lot of time to trust that I can be both less hypervigilant and still safe. That I don't have to see and seek the dangers and the stresses and the dramas of the world to stay safe, to stay ready.
That preparedness is it hurts so many of us. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Is like where we have ancient brains trying to deal with modern day problems. We're prepared for the next threat, for the next thing that's going to come up, but we don't have to be. And that awareness is so important. You talk about a confirmation script as well. You kind of like talked a little bit about that
Mm-hmm.
just then. Is like we're trying to confirm through external things that our story is correct, and if anyone goes against that gratitude or whatever that may be, things can be good. Uh, we automatically want to reject it, and it's so important to change that relationship. I find that that's so big. I mean, throughout your experience, you obviously, or at least I find that most authors write their book for themselves of some sort, and then of course to help other people in a part of that. But how is your relationship with trauma? How has that changed over time?
Oh, well, I would say I'm pretty much less addicted to drama. I mean, I definitely like don't, I refer to it in the book as like the empty sandwich effect. Once in a while, I'll go back and reach into the empty bag and realize like the sandwich is the trauma, the thing like that I need to keep feeding off of, essentially to keep the defensive patterns, to keep the behaviors, to go blow out a birthday candle with a fire hose. And sometimes I'll do the extreme thing sometimes, but I'll feel like, oh, I didn't actually need to do that. I no longer need to protect something with the extremes. And then it softens, and then I don't do it again a while, and it becomes less and less over time. But I think for me, I wrote the book because I was seeing it so much in clinical practice,
Mm.
like all the ways that people were avoiding themselves by revving themselves up, avoiding the vulnerability of feeling, the vulnerability of healing,
Yeah.
and using all these mechanisms of like revving. Like I had this client um, who I saw today, but I was seeing her a couple of years ago, and she brought something in, we processed it, she was starting to settle, literally her weight, her whole body looked like it was getting relief, like, I've been carrying around all this holding and tension and rage. And suddenly I get to like sink in, and just as she was about to fully sink into the chair, she just ramped up into the next issue. And we did it again. We like processed it. She was just about to relax. And then she ramped and revved back in to the next thing. And I was like, you're crisis hopping. And then just blurted it out because sometimes I'm not as skillful in my therapy. And I was like, you're crisis hopping. And she was like, oh my gosh, I am. And then I started noticing a lot of us do that. We go from one issue to the next in therapy, or we rarely take the time to settle in and feel progress and take that in. And instead, we're more focused on one issue into the next issue, as opposed to what it's like to feel resolve. Resolve is vulnerable. Resolve brings us closer into our body. Resolve brings us closer into contact with maybe the things we've been hiding in our body unintentionally, like feelings, stories, experiences. So often we will avoid a full resolve as a form of preservation or protection.
Yeah. We obviously dove through so much that I think people need to hear. I'm so grateful for your time. Is there any practical things that you can think of that people should be aware of to break out of that constant really way of life?
Yeah. I mean, have a lot of empathy for yourself. Obviously, if you were in control, first of all, if you're aware that you're doing it, if this is the example I like to just give, by the way, because it's much easier to, I purposely use the word addicted to drama. I know it has some potency to it, a little punch to it. I did that on purpose. If I had said addicted to stress, there would probably be less defensiveness around it. We could all be like, oh yeah, I get stressed out. But it's important to recognize, if you're able to identify the moments where you are interrupting your own peace, when you are interrupting your own settling and ease or comfort in a relationship, if boredom and anxiety poke its way in and you act on that and you get relief from some type of tension, even though the tension brings its own stress, that's really good information. If you're ever sitting in a meditation class and you're starting to settle your monkey mind or your mind, your chaos mind, which we all have, and you start to think about your boss, or you start to imagine a fight you had with your partner, anything that's so not in this moment that takes you out of this moment, that's an indication that is a propensity for drama. Yeah.
So powerful.
Addiction just means we have an attachment to it. And so I just want to say, if you recognize yourself in it, and we all will, why did you go scrolling on the internet that moment? What was happening in you that maybe you didn't want to attend to? Whatever it is, if you can recognize that perhaps some part of you or some aspect of you is contributing to the interruption of your own ease and peace of life, then you're off to a good start. You are on the path to healing.
Scott, your work is so powerful. There's one last question that I ask every guest.
Sure.
My question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief am I currently unlearning? Oh, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I am learning. I'm unlearning, rather. I am learning the belief that that I would say that you can't hang in there with tension. Especially in relationships. I had the belief for a long time of you see some red flags, you cut it. And I am exploring the belief that people can have red flags and you can stay in there. And I know that might not be a popular opinion at the moment, or on Instagram or whatever, of here's 20 red flags, now get the hell out of there. Yeah. Where I'm here's some red flags. Here's the human that's underneath them. And here's their protective responses that we're calling a flag. And what if it's possible to stay maybe even just a little bit longer in relation to them, that human, despite the red flags, unless I'm actually feeling in a position of danger. That's different. And then I get to evaluate what is danger. and what is perceived, what is narrative, like what am I adding to my own story, what is my old trauma. So yeah, that's what I would say is the belief I'm unlearning, that you have to get at it, you have to flee as soon as possible.
I love that. Scott, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of the work that you're putting in the world. I think this is such powerful stuff, and without even knowing it, so many people need to hear this because they're probably the people that are addicted to drama, and it's so powerful. Of course, all of your links will be in the show notes, but is there anything or anywhere that you like to direct people?
Sure. Yeah, you can check out my Instagram or website. It's at Dr. Scott Lyons, or my website is drscottlyons.com. The material I teach, so the workshops, certificates, trainings, is on the Embody Lab. So TheEmbodylab.com. And my book you can find anywhere, hopefully. It's called Addicted to Drama: Healing the Dependency on Crisis and Chaos in Yourself and Others.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.